Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Memoirs of an Addicted Brain. A neuroscientist examines his former life on drugs, by Marc Lewis, Ph.D., narrated by Jeff Semple. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Introduction. We are prone to a cycle of craving what we don't have, finding it, using it up or losing it, then craving it all the more. This cycle is at the root of all addictions. Addictions to drugs, sex, love, cigarettes, soap operas, wealth, and wisdom itself. But why should this be so? Why are we so desperate for what we don't have or can't have, often at great cost to what we do have, thereby risking our peace and contentment, our safety, and even our lives? Why are we so moved by our addictions, either succumbing to them or spending our energy fighting them? This book reveals how the fundamental workings of the brain are at the root of the problem, but from a unique vantage point. I use the events of my own life as a springboard to the addicted brain. In fact, I'm an expert on the matter, from inside out and outside in, because I'm a drug addict turned neuroscientist. In some ways, drugs are just another addiction, more powerful than many, more harmful than most, but just another pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Yet drugs are also unlike any other addiction, more revealing than any other addiction, because they ignite the neural flush of well-being directly, without the requirement of any particular experience or event. Drugs trick the brain into dispensing the neurochemicals of reward, or they mimic those chemicals themselves. Drugs provide a shortcut. They talk to the brain in its own language, the language of dopamine and peptides, neuromodulators and receptors. So drugs can teach us a lot about the brain, and what we know about the brain can teach us a lot about addiction. Neuroscientific research on addiction has progressed enormously in the last 20 years, but it doesn't go all the way. It lays out the pieces of the puzzle, but doesn't connect them, because it ignores the actual experiences that turn real people, motivated by hope as much as hedonism, resolve as much as indulgence, back into addicts again and again. This book brings the brain and human experience together by telling the story of my descent into drug addiction, interspersed with lessons on the brain and its workings, drawn from contemporary neuroscience. I follow the thread of adventures that began in a New England boarding school when I was 15 years old and despondent, 1,000 kilometers from my home in Toronto. From there, I moved to Berkeley, California, in the heyday of the drug movement, and upgraded my flirtations with cough medicine to an infatuation with LSD and then heroin. Interspersed with university life in Berkeley, I spent 2 years in Asia, where I joined medics sniffing nitrous oxide in the Malay jungle, bought heroin direct from the factory in Laos, and became a regular in the opium dens of Calcutta. I moved back to Toronto, married a woman I couldn't talk to, began stealing drugs from the psychology lab, then from medical centers, got clean, got divorced, fell off the wagon again, and ended up working in a mental hospital where the howls of the crazy people drove me back to crime. I finally got arrested and convicted, and then came the torturous road to a lasting recovery. At the age of 30, I traded in my pharmaceutical supplies for the life of a graduate student, eventually becoming a professor of development psychology and then of neuroscience, my field for the last 12 years. Now I study the brains of children who get into trouble, using the electrical signals from their scalps to explore what's going on underneath. But I often recall that I used to be one of those kids, that no matter how many scientific conferences I attend, I will always be one of those kids. Each chapter introduces a new drug experience or a new stage of drug addiction as the central theme of an episode from my own life and sometimes the lives of lovers, seekers, and sinners I met along the way. And each of these experiences emerges from a particular brain system, neurochemical flow, or synaptic process. Through the interplay of lived experience and neural activity, the addicted brain is revealed, and addiction is revealed to be a basic vulnerability of the nervous system itself. The episodes recounted here are all factual to the best of my ability to remember them, though some are blended to maintain the pace, and names and locations are sometimes disguised. I could not invent a story as strange and frightening as the life I lived as an addict. The dialogue is a best approximation of actual conversations, with some snippets burned in my memory and others deducted from more general recollections. Over 20 volumes of journal entries helped me recall what life was like in my teens and 20s. Finally, the neuroscience in this book, though simplified and accessible to the non-expert, is up-to-date and accurate. Many brain books pass on findings from 20 years ago, or blur the details to make them more digestible. Here, the details are precise and the data as current as last year's journal articles. The brain is incredibly complex, but it is not beyond understanding. Part 1. The Tabor Chronicles. Chapter 1. Changing State. The first time I got drunk was with Damien Tennant. It was a March night and freezing cold. I had been at Tabor less than 6 months, and depression was now a palpable daily companion, a disease to be managed. There were good days and bad days, but the good days were just tolerable, and the bad days nearly did me in. I hated this school. It was bigger than me. It was stronger than me. And it seemed as natural a part of the New England landscape as the rocky coves and stands of maple. I didn't belong here. I had got here by mistake. My first 2 years of high school had been at a nice, normal, suburban Toronto school a few blocks from my home. I might not have been the most popular kid in class, but nobody seemed to actively dislike me. I had a few friends. I got invited to a few parties. I had a girlfriend for a couple of months, and I could go home at night. That was the main thing. Here at Tabor, there was no home to return to at the end of the day, except the dorm. And I hated the dorm. I hated every whitewashed board, every hissing radiator, every creak in the polished hardwood floors. I hated my room. I hated my roommate. I hated the guy next door. And I hated my proctors, the senior boys whose job it was to supervise us and care for us while helping induct us into this bizarre paramilitary culture. Paranaval, actually. Tabor was a paranaval academy, but that didn't mean much to me at the time. The naval terminology seemed a bad joke, an effort to reenact the Hollywood heroism of World War II. We would sometimes see men who looked like admirals strolling the pathways with the headmaster, gold stripes on dark blue cuffs. There were special prayers at Vespers, Navy uniforms to be ironed and worn a few weeks a year, drill sessions with guns and a marching band. And yes, we were located on a body of water, and there were a lot of boats. Sailboats, rowboats, crew boats, a schooner out in the harbor. It was the boats that had attracted me in the first place, the previous spring in Toronto. "Mark, we'd like to talk to you about your options for next year," my mother had said in her frank, slightly invasive tone. What options? I was beckoned to the kitchen table, where I sat down with both parents. The table was covered with pamphlets from different private schools, most of them in New England. "You seem a little bored with school," Mom continued, "and maybe a little discontent overall?" Those penetrating eyes, hazel and clear with mildly arched brows, scanned me for an accuracy reading. They gazed at me steadily from her pretty, mid-30ish face, a face surrounded by sprayed-in-place hair that became increasingly blonde as the 60s wore on. My mother seemed to wield her own sixth sense. She could look into me and find things. As usual, I soon felt I must be hiding whatever it was she was looking for. "I'm fine, Mum. Everything's okay." My dad sat beside her, hunched over and uncomfortable. His pleasant features, thin black hair, and solemn brown eyes would have been more at home at a meeting of the family-run leather business. Dad didn't usually get involved in family discussions with an emotional theme, if that's what this was. Maybe he was in the dark as much as I was. His half-smile tried to make light of things, but this was sounding ominous. "I know everything's fine," she said, "but remember we talked about boarding schools, and you said you might be interested? Remember, we'll be moving to San Francisco in 2 years' time. Going to an American school would save you a year of high school. You'd be able to go straight to college the year we arrive. So," she smiled encouragingly, "I've done my homework and gotten these pamphlets from some very fine schools, and we thought," with a glance at my dad, "that you might want to look at them." It all seemed exciting, though too far off to think about. So I looked at the pamphlets piled up in front of me. We looked together, and my parents pointed out this and that feature of this and that school. I tried to pay attention, but my thoughts wandered like stray cats. I was preoccupied, some sort of creeping disorientation at the very prospect of leaving home. And beneath that, intangible but potent, a sense of dread. Were they trying to get rid of me? Had I done something wrong? Tabor was my world. There was nothing left to decide. Every morning, I joined 400 other teenage boys tramping along a wooden walkway between brick buildings in a cold mist. Breakfast settling, the assembly hall looming, thinking about ways to avoid attention. Our headmaster, Mr. Witherstein, looked as though he'd stepped out of an old movie. He parted his hair almost dead center, and he was gray and crusty, like a venerable admiral himself. He waited for us at the lectern, beaming with unnatural enthusiasm. He delighted in the series of routine announcements that he would soon recite with such gravity. I took my assigned seat. Each seat back held a short wire rack containing a hymnal. I reached toward mine automatically, on cue. We opened our hymnals together, the rustle of pages filling the hall, and we began to sing. "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing." God had never appeared to me as a fort or a bulwark. Maybe that was because I was Jewish. Yet I didn't mind the singing. It numbed me. There was a comforting anonymity in being part of this mass, this sea of boys, packed row after row in a heated auditorium. I was safe for now. Back at my dorm, it was survival of the fittest, and I wasn't all that fit. A pecking order had consolidated in the early months, and I was pretty close to the bottom. At first, my roommate, Todd, was the victim of some pretty vicious teasing by just about everyone, but especially Bob Moore, the handsome giant who lived in the room next door. Moore was a frontline football player, though still a junior, and for that alone he was universally admired. Todd put some sort of lotion on his face at night, giving it an awful vampiric whiteness, all the more disturbing with his black stubble poking through. He was soon known to one and all as Madame Butterfly. I was sympathetic at first, but I didn't like him much. He was caustic, whiny, and sour. I tried to like him. I tried to be nice to him. But I secretly hoped that his victimization would keep me safe, give me some breathing space. Meanwhile, Moore had risen rapidly to power. His own roommate, Randy, was an absurd-looking, gangly outcast with protruding ears, perfectly designed by nature for the role of village idiot. And he was Moore's roommate. I felt sorry for Randy. What torments must he suffer? But I was relieved that Moore was surrounded by victim material. Although I knew that was selfish, I needed it to be so. I needed the playing field tilted in my favor. And then, to my horror, it tilted the other way. The dominance hierarchy heaved a final time, and Randy and Todd ended up Moore's lieutenants, his slaves. Randy brought him anything he asked for. He literally stood around, waiting for orders. Todd found his niche fawning over Moore from the sidelines, grinning at his savage jokes and heaping ridicule on his victims. I was next in line. "Hey, Lewis," Moore smiled at me almost warmly from the doorway connecting our rooms. His broad, manly features beamed with good humor. "Yes?" "Come on in. Join the party." "Okay." I couldn't refuse. "Did you see what happened to my dresser?" "No." "Take a look." "I don't see anything." "Come closer." He seemed so inviting. I wanted to believe that I was really being included, but I didn't see anything unusual. "Closer." "I don't see—" "Bring your head right up to the edge here, you dummy. You have to look at it from just the right angle." I did as I was told, moving my face to within inches of the dresser surface. There seemed to be a pool of water there. "I see some water. How did that happen?" Then, smash. His palm came down hard on the little puddle. My face was soaked, and whatever was running down my cheeks stung my eyes, which started instantly to tear. Aftershave? Hydrochloric acid? Liquid shame? My tears were the worst part. "How did that happen?" Moore echoed in mincing tones. "How did that happen?" His voice rose with incredulity while he danced around the room. "Did it make you cry, Lewis? Poor baby. We better call your mama." And they all erupted into laughter. Moore, Randy, Todd, and another guy. I looked through tears at Moore's grinning hyena mask, curling now with contempt, and I wanted to slip through the floor. What was wrong with me? I began to avoid my dorm whenever I could, to synchronize my comings and goings with those of the other boys, so Moore couldn't get me alone. I made a couple of friends, and that helped. There were other misfits who had no interest, and generally no place, in the jock-dominated hierarchy. By Christmas, I spent a lot of time with Schwartz and Burton. Joe Schwartz was a junior like me, but he was leather tough in some unique way, self-sufficient and really smart. Burton was just a big teddy bear, gruff and mischievous, whom nobody could dislike. I got to know their friends, Gelsthorpe, Perry, and Norris, all seniors. These were the guys who would graduate at the end of the year, and they all lived in another dorm, Pond House. I spent a lot of time at Pond House, and I wished I could switch. But at night I had to return to my own dorm, with its 16 boys, often creeping up the back stairs to avoid notice. Sometimes, before going to my room and facing Todd, I'd drop in on Lawrence Carr, one of the 2 black kids at Tabor. That's 2 out of 400. The other one, Laval, was despised by all. He wore his bitterness like an armband. But Carr stayed above the fray and was left alone. In my eyes, he was magnificent. "How do you handle it?" I wanted to know. "I take it all for granted," he replied. His smile was gentle, chiding. "What did you expect, man? Tabor is no temple of brotherhood. It is exactly what it appears to be." "Yes, but just wait it out. Keep your own counsel." It seemed easy for him. When I finally learned how to avoid Moore's displays of goodwill, trouble came from a guy named Wiley who lived across the hall. Passing his door became an agony of nerves. A Jew! A Jew! Excuse me, I mean achoo! Bless me. "Hey, Lewis, did you hear someone sneeze?" His voice rang with feigned bafflement. Wiley was rotund and greasy, with small eyes and a blistering tongue. He sat chinless, unmoving, on a chair well inside his room, opposite the door, waiting for fresh bait to pass within range without his having to move from his lair. I was bait, defenseless bait. "Don't let them know they're getting you down," my mother advised on the phone. "If they don't get a reaction, they'll stop." That was probably the worst advice I'd ever got from anyone. Or maybe I just didn't know how to implement it. I couldn't imagine how I might pretend that it wasn't getting me down. It crushed me. Wiley could see my face as I hurried by, or see me looking down, avoiding his gaze. But I soon got more potent advice from an unlikely source, a boy named Miles. He was a loner, like Carr, and confident, like Carr. In fact, contemptuous of the scurrying cruelty around him. I sat at the foot of his bed one night, looking at the unfathomable pictures of his enormous home in the deep south. "Lewis," he asked, leaning regally against the headboard, "why do you let Wiley pick on you?" He studied me carefully, trying to discern the peculiar defect that must be there. "I don't mean to. What choice do I have?" "What choice?" he snorted with mild disgust. "Lewis, your problem is that you have no common sense. You're an intelligent kid, but you don't know how to use it. What should I do? If there was some workable trick, I wanted badly to know it. Look at Wiley. Does he have any weaknesses?" "Well, no. He's got lots of friends, in fact." "Yeah, but is there anything about him that he's not proud of, that he doesn't want his friends to see?" "Just that he's fat, I guess." "That's right. He doesn't like being fat, does he?" As if to a 6-year-old. "So you could get him just as bad as he gets you." Miles proceeded to train me in the art of verbal swordplay. I practiced daily in pretend showdowns, saying, "Hey, Wiley, you're so fat, your mother needed explosives to get you out. Hey, Wiley, you're so fat, you can't reach your asshole to wipe your shit, which is why you stink so bad. Hey, Wiley, the reason you never come out of your room is because you can't fit through the door." I couldn't imagine actually saying such things aloud, until one weekend morning, incredibly, I dived off the deep end and blurted out one of these haikus right at him, right in through his door as I passed by. His contemptuous smirk collapsed into outrage, and, could it be, a touch of fear, as if he'd been stung by an ant. Wiley remained manageable as long as I flung the occasional caustic remark back at him. He was reduced to snickers and glaring, but I couldn't fight the proctors. They had ultimate authority, ultimate confidence, and they seemed to relish punishing me. At one point, I had to shine their shoes and leave them neatly by the doorpost, every day for 2 weeks, and much to the delight of Moore and Wiley. That was my punishment for coming late to breakfast one morning. Another week I had to make their beds perfectly, for the crime of having left mine unmade in my rush to be on time. That's how I learned about promptness and order. But worse than the punishments was the scorn that went with them. "Not good enough, Lewis. Do it again." "What are you doing here anyway, Lewis? Did they kick you out of Canada for being a fag? Hey, these shoes shine. You see, you can do something right." Why did they torment me? There must be something wrong with me, but what? I looked intently at myself in the mirror. All I saw was a regular-looking 15-year-old kid with wavy brown hair, some dark stubble spreading about unevenly, my mother's hazel eyes, an okay nose, a bit Jewish, but not unseemly. My mom even said I was handsome, but what else would she say? And anyway, I wasn't the only minority. I wasn't the only Jew or the only foreigner, though there weren't many of us. A dark rumination spread week by week. It bubbled to the surface on the way to and from classes, during mealtime, while lying on my bed doing nothing. A sporadic flow of sulfurous toxins, snatches of dialogue laced with anxiety, shame, and dread, spirals of self-criticism. Why can't you get it right? Why can't you learn? What the hell's wrong with you? Why are you such a wimp? A running tirade of self-blame like an invasive radio station. And why not? I was far away from home. I was not very well liked by my immediate associates, and my parents seemed to have lost me on their radar. One night just before Christmas break, I was so desperate that I knocked on the door of the master who lived below us, Mr. Wharton, whose house this was. He and his wife and 2 attractive daughters inhabited a large apartment on the ground floor, a real home with a living room and a kitchen and bedrooms. But the master's homes were out of bounds. In fact, the masters were pretty much out of bounds. We faced them in the classroom, the sports field, the dining hall. We sang with them at vespers, And that was it. Now it was 10 at night. A massive Christmas tree dominated the room before me, but Wharton blocked it like a football lineman. His eyes were hard, cold, and spookily bright. He leaned up against the threshold, crossed his arms, and asked me, "What's the problem?" A tale of woe came spilling out of me quickly at first, but it soon began to sound ridiculous, pathetic, cowardly, even to my ears, and trickled to a stop. At which point Wharton smiled in some pseudo-fatherly way, his breath spiked with vodka, and reassured me that I would be just fine. The boys could be a little frisky sometimes, but they were just being boys. I was still new, and I was raised differently. I'd toughen up soon. Instead of toughening up, I spent more and more time at Pond House. Only 5 boys lived there, but others came to visit regularly. Pond House was a haven for Tabor's outcasts, failures at almost everything except writing, as demonstrated through longish existential essays that we hoped would keep our English master from sinking into despair. On a typical Saturday afternoon in February, I climbed up the side stairs to the growing whine of a Dylan record and bits of conversation trickling from Perry's room. I pushed the door open, and a warm wave swept over me. There were friendly faces all around. Guys were sitting on desks, shelves, dressers, and beds, chatting about the stupidity of Tabor culture and their hopes for rebirth next year. I sat on the floor. Huge paper flowers poked out of holes in the wall. An iconic Allen Ginsberg smiled down from a poster above a bed. Coke cans, mostly empty, were scattered about the room, and peanut butter sandwiches passed from hand to hand. I felt safe. Later, when no one could agree on what record to play, we grabbed our coats and ran down to the shore, right at the foot of the snow-patched lawn. We climbed along the rocks lining the harbor, then took turns running across the ice, way out, to where you could see the dark water just underneath you. You could feel it pressing upward against this fragile membrane, waiting to engulf you if you chose the wrong path. We cheered each other on, crazily, with no concern for life or death, lost in the ecstasy of escape. I was outside myself at last. If only I could stay there. Teenagers spend an enormous amount of effort creating themselves. They find themselves in a world where social comparison means everything, far more than the popularity contest that starts at age 5. It's now a sudden death tournament. When you lose, it's your whole identity that takes the hit, with no parents handy to put you back together. There are so many ways to be uncool, to find yourself on the outside, to lose hard-won social ground. The buttresses of character constantly need repair and rebuilding by dint of hard work and excruciating self-examination. It's no accident that adolescence is the period of greatest psychological vulnerability. In the years from 13 to 16, every emotional disorder climbs in incidence from a flat line to a rising slope. Depression, suicide attempts, anorexia, conduct disorders, and of course, substance abuse. Adolescence is a fragile time when the rapid rate of self-renewal leaves patches of wet mortar, joints that endanger the whole structure, where the fault lines touch the surface, exposing the core to infection and collapse. By the time I got to Tabor, my newly minted persona was just starting to harden. It had elements of manly fortitude, humor, I could make people chuckle, and what I hoped was an understated but keen intelligence. I was a smart kid, likable, generous, easygoing, stalwart, and brave, like my TV heroes, but with a winning sensitivity that girls would appreciate. At least that's who I wanted to be, and I was working on it. Like other kids my age, the big job was to keep juggling the pieces until I could catch them one by one and stick them onto an accumulating selfhood. It's a tough job, but I was managing. Until I got to Tabor. Until I got to Tabor. And that's where I lost a critical part of the foundation, a concrete floor needed to hold up the rest. What I lost was a sense.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?